I had never imagined that accepting a job as a personal assistant would steer my life into such complicated territory. It began innocently enough, organizing meetings, managing emails, and coordinating schedules for Mr. Khalid, a well-known entrepreneur in the logistics sector. He was charismatic, refined, and known for his ability to command attention without raising his voice. Around the office, people spoke of him with a mix of admiration and cautious respect. At first, I was impressed by his professionalism. He rarely smiled, but when he did, it felt intentional, as though he'd carefully chosen the moment. I prided myself on staying within boundaries, keeping things efficient and respectful. It was important to me to maintain a clear line between work and personal space. But with Mr. Khalid, that line began to blur in ways I didn't fully understand. It was a Friday afternoon when he asked me to accompany him on a road trip to meet a client in a neighboring city. "I'd prefer someone I trust," he'd said with a half smile, gesturing toward the passenger seat. I agreed, feeling flattered that he'd picked me over other assistants who had worked with him longer. We left late in the afternoon, hoping to make it by nightfall. The road stretched endlessly ahead, framed by distant hills and an orange-tinged sky. I drove while he sat in the back seat, buried in documents, occasionally asking questions or giving brief instructions. The conversation was light, mostly work-related. Still, there were moments, fleeting ones, when I caught his eyes in the rearview mirror, lingering just a second too long. After a few hours, fatigue began to set in. My shoulders ached, and my eyelids grew heavy. I mentioned needing a short break, and he nodded. We pulled over near a rest stop, quiet, isolated, and shaded by eucalyptus trees. I left the driver's seat and moved to the back where it was more spacious. "I'll just close my eyes for a bit," I mumbled, pulling my legs up slightly to stretch. He stayed silent, returning to his work. I laid back, letting the hum of distant traffic lull me into a soft doze. My legs were bent at the knees, propped against the seat's edge, not out of invitation, but out of exhaustion. The air was still, the moment calm. As I drifted between sleep and awareness, I felt something shift, not in the car, but in the air. A subtle, almost imperceptible change. I didn't open my eyes then. I didn't need to. I could feel something. Approaching, not danger, not yet, but something unspoken. And even in that half-conscious state, a quiet voice inside me whispered that this moment would not pass without consequence. A soft rustle stirred me from my sleep. At first I thought it was the wind brushing against the car window, but then I felt it. A presence. Gentle, yet too close. Before I could fully awaken, I realized an arm was around me, warm and deliberate. I blinked, disoriented, only to see Mr. Khalid beside me in the back seat. His hand rested lightly on my shoulder, and his face was unnervingly close. "I didn't mean to wake you," he whispered, his voice low and unusually tender. "You looked so peaceful." I couldn't help myself. My breath caught. I didn't move, didn't speak. My mind raced, trying to comprehend what was happening. He hadn't done anything overtly inappropriate, not yet. But his closeness, the way his eyes searched mine, felt undeniably intimate. Then he leaned in and placed a soft kiss on my forehead. It was not aggressive, not forceful, but it broke something. I sat up slowly, unsure of how to respond. He didn't pull away. Instead, he smiled faintly, as if we had just shared a private understanding. "I've admired your grace for a long time," he said, brushing a strand of hair away from my face. "You're not like the others." There was a silence so heavy it seemed to still the air around us. Part of me wanted to believe he was simply caught in a moment, driven by emotion. But another part, quieter, sharper, knew better. This wasn't a harmless accident. This was a boundary being crossed carefully, methodically, under the guise of affection. "I think we should get going," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. I shifted away, careful not to escalate the situation. He looked at me for a long second, then nodded. "Of course," he said, sliding back into his seat with practiced calm. I apologize if I overstepped. But the words felt hollow, polite, calculated. As I returned to the driver's seat and started the car, I kept my hands steady on the wheel, even though my thoughts were in chaos. Had I misread him all this time? Or had he simply waited for the right moment to act? The rest of the drive was quiet. He didn't speak. I didn't ask questions. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was loaded, thick with the weight of something neither of us could erase. I stared straight ahead, trying to convince myself that what happened could be brushed off, that I could file it away as a misunderstanding. But, deep down, I knew better. Some lines, once crossed, cannot be uncrossed. Back at the office on Monday, everything looked the same. Emails stacked in my inbox, files needing sorting, meetings to prepare. But I wasn't the same. I walked into work dressed in my usual confidence, but inside I carried the weight of what had happened in that car like a secret no one could see. Mr. Khalid greeted me with his usual composed charm, as though the weekend had never occurred. He handed me a schedule to review, thanked me for my work, and carried on with polite professionalism. There was no mention of his sudden display of affection, no hint of guilt or apology in his tone. I nodded and responded as expected, but something in me had shifted. A sense of betrayal simmered beneath my calm exterior, not just because of what he did, but because of how easily he pretended it hadn't happened. It was as if my discomfort, my boundaries, didn't matter. Then came the text messages. Tsajoy. First, they were vague. Hope you're having a calm evening. Then more personal. I missed the way you looked at me when we were alone. I never replied. But the messages kept coming, never aggressive, always cloaked in politeness, yet undeniably inappropriate. He began calling me into his office more often, not for work, but for casual conversations. He'd compliment my ideas, linger on my opinions, ask questions that felt more personal than professional. I tried to remain neutral, to answer briefly and leave quickly, but he noticed. You seem distant lately, he remarked one afternoon, leaning against the edge of his desk with that practiced air of concern. Did I do something to upset you? I wanted to scream, to list every reason I felt betrayed, but I couldn't bring myself to speak. Instead, I offered a small smile. Just tired, nothing more. He nodded slowly, eyes searching mine. Let me know if you need anything at all. I left his office with my heart racing, unsure whether I was more angry at him or at myself. Why hadn't I reported him? Why did I stay silent? The truth was complicated. I feared not being believed. I feared losing my job. Most of all, I feared confirming that the trust I'd once placed in him had been misplaced from the start. At night, I would replay that moment in the car. His hand, his words, the look in his eyes. I kept wondering if I had misled him somehow, if I'd given the wrong signals. But deep down, I knew this wasn't about misunderstanding. It was about control, disguised as charm, wrapped in admiration, delivered through silence. And that silence had started to suffocate me. The days dragged on, heavy with unspoken truths. I went through the motions, answering phones, attending meetings, keeping my posture straight and my smile polite. But something inside me had changed. I had begun to resent the silence I had so carefully preserved. Not just his silence, mine. It was a Tuesday when the final line was crossed. Mr. Khalid asked me to stay late to help finalize a proposal. I agreed out of habit, not because I wanted to. The office emptied slowly, the fluorescent lights above humming in the stillness. He emerged from his office, sleeves rolled, eyes warm in a way that now only made my skin crawl. We sat side by side in the boardroom, documents spread between us. As I pointed out a revision in the budget chart, he reached over and gently placed his hand on mine. You're the only one I trust like this, he said, his voice low and full of intent. I froze. Not in fear, but in realization. This wasn't about affection. It was about power, his and my apparent lack of it. He believed I wouldn't speak, that I would keep pretending, that my silence meant permission. I pulled my hand back slowly. I'm done for tonight. I said, gathering my things without looking at him. And I think I'm done with this job. His brows knit in surprise. Is this about me? He asked, suddenly more guarded. I met his gaze. It's about me, and the person I don't want to become. The next morning, I handed in my resignation. No drama, no detailed explanations. Just a clean break from a place that had become a prison of pretense. He didn't protest. He accepted it with a quiet nod, his eyes unreadable. Walking out of that office for the last time felt like surfacing for air after being underwater too long. The sunlight was too bright, the street too loud, but I welcomed it. For the first time in weeks, I felt in control. I still question why I didn't speak up earlier, why I allowed things to go as far as they did. But healing, I've learned, is not linear. It's stitched from moments of clarity, of strength, and of self-forgiveness. Some stories don't end with confrontation or public justice. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away and choose peace over silence, healing over shame. I wasn't a victim. I wasn't weak. I was someone who learned the hard way that not all admiration is genuine, and not all charm is kind. But, most importantly, I learned how to listen to the voice inside me that said, enough.